5 missing years, the original Ben 10 ends with a 10-year-old boy standing beside a broken watch, having just saved the world from Vilgax in front of his own parents and the bullies from his school. Everyone knows what he did. Everyone saw it. Then Alien Force opens and none of that matters. 5 years have passed. Ben is 15. The Omnitrix sits in a drawer somewhere in his house. He plays soccer. He plays baseball. Nobody brings up Vilgax. Nobody brings up the alien watch that turned a 5th grader into a local legend in front of an entire school full of witnesses. The show simply moves on, and it expects you to move on with it. Here's the thing. Nothing on screen ever tells you why. Not one flashback, not one line of dialogue, explains why a kid who spent an entire summer risking his life to protect the planet decided to quietly retire and never look back. Omniverse eventually shows flashbacks from those missing years. Ben still had the Omnitrix, still transformed, still fought threats behind the scenes. In one of those flashbacks, his favorite alien, Feedback, gets absorbed and apparently killed by a cold mechanical creature called Malware. Ben overloads Malware's system in a fit of rage, seemingly destroying him. Afterward, he's quiet for days. Fans have connected that moment to the retirement ever since. It fits. It's the kind of loss that would make a kid want to put the watch away for good. And years later, when Ben runs into Malware again as a teenager, his reaction is noticeably colder and angrier than his usual easygoing self, almost like an old wound reopening. But here's where it gets interesting. The show never says it. Not once does a single character link Malware's attack to Ben quitting. It's a theory built entirely by the audience, stitched together from a flashback that exists in a completely different series, made years after the fact using a character who wasn't even created yet when the original show ended. The 5-year gap was written as a fresh start for a rebooted show aimed at an older audience. The in-universe reason was never the point, the meta reason was. There's also the small matter of the Omnitrix itself. When Ben straps it back on in Alien Force, it forces a reset, locking him out of his original 10 aliens and replacing them with a new set. Some fans theorize 5 years of inactivity caused the device to recalibrate on its own, as if the Omnitrix itself needed a fresh start just as badly as Ben did. That's never confirmed either. It's just a convenient coincidence sitting right next to an already unexplained gap. So the question stays technically open. What actually made Ben Tennyson walk away from being a hero for 5 straight years while Vilgax was still out there, while the plumbers still needed him? The show hands you a broken watch, a 5-year jump cut, and a boy who came back different, and never once tells you what happened in between. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite Unsolved Ben 10 mystery. Let's get back into the video. How Malware came back. That fight from Ben's missing years wasn't just an emotional turning point. It left behind a hard technical question the show never circles back to answer. In the flashback, Ben overloads Malware with the Omnitrix at full power, and by every visual cue the show gives, that's a kill shot. Feedback stands over a destroyed enemy. The scene plays like a death. Years pass. Then Malware simply shows back up, alive, functioning, and more dangerous than before, with no explanation offered for how he survived an attack. The show itself framed as fatal. Malware's basic origin is actually one of the better documented backstories in the franchise. He's a galvanic mechamorph, one of the techno-organic species created by Azimuth's experimental helix device on the moon, Galvan B. Except his own life code got interrupted mid-creation when the helix was shut down too early. That birth defect left him corrupted, unable to properly bond with technology the way his healthy siblings could, only able to devour it. Azimuth, functioning as something like an estranged father, spent years promising a cure he never delivered fast enough, and Malware's resentment curdled into an obsession with destroying every perfect mechamorph Azimuth ever made, along with Azimuth himself. None of that explains the gap between the flashback and his return, though. TV Tropes itself flags this directly as an unexplained recovery, noting that while it can loosely be chalked up to a galvanic mechamorph's general regenerative abilities, the show never actually reveals how Malware survived being overloaded by the Omnitrix in the first place. This is a franchise that usually loves showing its work. Malware's other transformations are all explained on screen, from Albedo sabotaging a repair helix and accidentally strengthening him, to him absorbing a tachyon cannon to build a new arm. Every other upgrade gets an origin scene. The one that matters most, the resurrection that undoes his own apparent death, gets nothing. He's just back angrier, and nobody in the show ever asks him how. Kevin's real father. For years, fans thought they had the answer. In the Alien Force episode Dark Star Rising, Kevin tells Gwen his father was a plumber. He never met the man. His mother just told him stories. Later, that father gets a name, Kevin Levin, and a full backstory. Devin was described as energetic and likable, a human passing Osmosian with black pupils and short black hair, no horns like the ones Agrigor carried. There was even a photograph of the two of them together, Devin in a red button-up shirt, Kevin looking about 4 or 5 years old. It's a clean answer. A missing hero father, a grieving mother, a son who inherited abilities he didn't understand. Fans built years of headcanon on top of it, right down to debating whose eye color Kevin's son Devlin should have inherited. Then Omniverse pulled the floor out. In the 2-part episode Weapon 11, it's revealed that Kevin Levin never existed at all. He was a false memory planted directly into Grandpa Max's mind by a rogue plumber named Servantis, just so Max would feel obligated to keep watching over Kevin without ever knowing why. The entire Osmosian father backstory, the photo, the stories his mother supposedly told him, the memories of Devin laying down cover fire while Max defused a bomb, all of it was fabricated and slipped into Max's head like a planted implant. Osmos Phi, the planet Osmosians were said to come from, was retconned into never having existed either. It was, in the show's own words, made up by Servantis. So who is Kevin's actual father? The show never says. What we do know is uglier than the Devin story ever was. Kevin has said his real father was abusive, that he mistreated Kevin badly enough that Kevin ran away from home as a child, stole a bike, and wore its padlock around his neck as a memento of the first crime he ever committed. No name for this man, no face, no resolution. Servantis erased whatever real memories Kevin had and replaced them with a fiction, and the show never bothered to put the truth back. Kevin Levin, one of the most rewritten characters in the entire franchise, mutant, then Osmosian, then lab experiment, still doesn't know where his own powers or his own family truly came from. And neither do we. Where Servantis came from. Speaking of Servantis, the man behind the fake father, his own history is just as full of holes. He's the leader of the Rooters, a Black Ops plumber unit that operates out of the Null Void, the prison dimension usually reserved for the galaxy's worst criminals. Servantis was, at some point, a legitimate plumber, a Proctor-ranked one, which is no small title. Somewhere along the way, he ended up trapped in the Null Void himself. The official record on why is blunt, for unspecified reasons, at an unspecified time. That's it. That's the whole explanation the franchise ever gives. From inside that prison dimension, Servantis built an entire secret organization. He rescued a young Kevin Levin from a hostile alien creature, welcomed him in, and used Kevin's own absorption powers combined with a cerebrocrustacean known as Dignitary 16 to mutate himself into a human crustacean hybrid. He took in 4 more stranded kids, Manny, Helen, Pierce, and Alan, mixed their human DNA with alien DNA using Kevin as the biological bridge, and trained the resulting hybrids as a hidden strike team he called his Ben Hit Squad. His justification was that the Omnitrix could one day transform Ben into something like a Tukustar or even a celestial sapien, and that Ben represented what he called the coming storm, a threat so large it could unmake the universe. When the mission ultimately failed, Servantis erased the kids' memories of the entire operation and released them back into the Null Void, as if none of it had happened. That's not a small operation to run from exile. It takes resources, loyalty, and years of planning, and somehow a man stripped of his rank and stranded in a dimension built to contain monsters managed to build all of it from scratch, including apparently unlimited access to genetic engineering technology. The show never explains how he pulled it off or what actually put him in the Null Void in the first place. Was he framed by the plumbers? Did he break the rules chasing his obsession with Ben even before Ben ever picked up the Omnitrix? Once Servantis is finally defeated, the Rooters are stripped of their plumber status for good and left stranded in the Null Void, the same dimension he apparently started in, with the same way bad monsters that make the place so dangerous in the first place. The story ends exactly where it began, and the part that would explain how it all started never gets filled in. The planet nobody survives. Zid Skayer, the Ectonurite, better known to Ben as Ghost Freak, comes from a world called Anur Phaetos, the darkest and most infamous planet in the Anur system. A corner of the galaxy so notorious it also contains Anur Transil, home to the vampire-like Vilgax, and Anur Phaetos, ruled by the werewolf-like Loboans. Anur Phaetos sits at the top of that unpleasant neighborhood, ruled entirely by ghost-like beings who can possess other creatures and peel back their own skin to reveal skeletal, tentacled true forms underneath. What makes it different from every other alien homeworld in the show isn't just how it looks. It's how little anyone actually knows about it. According to the franchise's own background material, no outside visitor has ever gone to Anur Phaetos and come back to describe it. Not a trader, not a scout, not a plumber. The planet functions as a total information vacuum inside a franchise that usually loves showing you exactly how its alien worlds work, right down to their governments and their weather. Zizaskayer himself is barely more explained. Long before Ben ever became Ghost Freak, Zizaskayer was already the High Ecto-Lord ruling both Anur Phaetos and the neighboring planet Unexplained. He was old, powerful, and in charge of an entire multi-species dominion long before his DNA ever touched the Omnitrix. Some background material floating around the fandom claims Zizaskayer deliberately allowed his DNA to be scanned into the Omnitrix through trickery, essentially planting a piece of himself inside the device on purpose, though this version of events has never been confirmed on screen and should be treated as unverified expanded lore rather than settled fact. What is confirmed is simpler and just as strange. An Ectonurite's consciousness can apparently exist inside a strand of its own DNA, which is part of why the Ghost Freak trapped in Ben's Omnitrix could develop his own independent personality at all, separate from whatever the real Zizaskayer back on Anur Phaetos was doing during all those years. How he became that powerful in the first place, what his rule over Anur Phaetos actually looked like day to day, how Ectonurite society organized itself before Ben ever showed up, none of it makes it to screen. The show gives you a ruler with no coronation, a species with no real history, and a planet with no eyewitnesses. That absence of information isn't a fluke. It's baked into the way Anur Phaetos gets described from the very first time it's ever mentioned. A planet nobody returns from doesn't get a travel guide. It gets a warning label, and Ben's own Ectonurite form is a living fragment of a world the show made sure to keep just out of reach. Professor Paradox's real name. Every time travel story in Ben 10 eventually runs through Professor Paradox, and yet the character built to explain everyone else's timelines remains one of the least explained people in the entire franchise. His own origin is on record, at least in outline. In the 1950s, he was an ordinary government scientist working out of what would become the site of Los Soledad, funded to study strange properties he discovered in local quartz crystals. An experiment meant to punch a small hole in space-time went wrong when his panicked assistant, Hugo, triggered an explosion, and Paradox was thrown into the resulting event horizon. He stayed there for 100,000 years. No aging, no sleeping, no eating, just existing outside of time entirely, until he eventually went insane, and then, after who knows how many millennia more, simply got bored of being insane and pulled himself back together. By the time he emerged, he had a complete understanding of the space-time continuum, and he'd forgotten his own original name in the process. Gwen ends up naming him after the very project that stranded him there, Professor Paradox, because as far as he's concerned, Paradox is as good a name as any at this point. It's a genuinely unsettling origin dressed up in the show's usual light tone, and to its credit, the franchise doesn't shy away from that part. What it does shy away from is everything that comes after. There's also the small matter of when he actually met Ben's team for the first time from his own perspective. Because he experiences time non-linearly, the character introduces himself to Ben, Gwen, and Kevin already familiar with them, and with events they haven't lived through yet, casually referencing things that, from their side, haven't happened. He confirms, almost in passing, that the very first alien he ever saw Ben turn into was Swamp Fire. But the actual scene of that first meeting, the one moment that would anchor his entire relationship with the team, is never shown. We only ever get him already knowing them, never the introduction that got him there. Paradox openly states there are places he cannot go and things he cannot do, without ever specifying what those restrictions actually are or who, if anyone, imposed them. At some point he worked for Area 51, apparently connected to their alien prisoners in some capacity, though what that job actually involved is never detailed. Entire alien species in this franchise, the Chronosapiens in particular, are said to resent him for reasons that are only ever hinted at rather than explained. His long history with Eon, the closest thing he has to an actual arch-enemy, is treated as common knowledge between the two of them that the audience is simply never let in on. We're shown the grudge, never the origin of it. A being who has personally seen and reshaped more of this franchise's history than almost anyone else remains, by design, the character the show trusts you the least to fully understand. Which Ben is Eon. Eon looks simple on the surface, an armored, time-traveling villain obsessed with hunting down alternate versions of Ben Tennyson so that only one version of him can exist across the entire multiverse. Take off the mask and you're staring at an older Ben, visually identical to Ben 10,000, the adult hero from 20 years in Ben's future. Case closed, right? Eon is just Ben 10,000, gone bad, corrupted by decades of power and isolation. Except the show itself won't commit to that. In the episode, Ben 10,000 returns, where Eon is finally unmasked, Ben 10,000 doesn't recognize him as himself. When Eon brings up their last meeting, Ben 10,000's response is blunt, "That wasn't me." Professor Paradox, a being who understands time travel better than nearly anyone else in the franchise, treats Eon as an entirely separate problem from the heroic Ben 10,000 standing right next to him rather than two versions of the same person reconciling their history. If Eon really were simply this Ben 10,000's own dark future, that denial makes no sense at all. The most consistent reading fans have landed on is that Eon isn't the Ben 10,000 audiences already know. He's a corrupted version from a different branch of the timeline entirely, a parallel Ben who made different choices somewhere along the way and became something monstrous instead. Professor Paradox even references a universe where Ben never had to destroy his original Omnitrix to stop Vilgax, hinting at the sheer number of diverging timelines quietly running in parallel throughout the multiverse. Series co-creator Duncan Rouleau has said he believes Eon still exists as a legitimate transformation for some alternate version of Ben somewhere out there, which would mean the Cronian species Eon originally claimed to belong to, before that whole backstory got retconned, might genuinely exist in select corners of the multiverse rather than being pure fiction. That's creator speculation, not something confirmed within an episode, but it's about as close to an answer as the franchise has ever come. What never gets nailed down is which specific timeline actually produces Eon, or what exactly pushed that version of Ben over the edge into wanting to erase every other version of himself. The dialogue actively contradicts the simplest explanation, and no episode ever replaces it with a clear one. Even Eon's own signature weapon, a stolen cybernetic hand called the Chrono Navigator, is never explained in terms of where or who he took it from. Eon remains a warning about what Ben could become, from a future the show refuses to name, wielding a device with an origin nobody ever bothers to ask about, what actually happens to Vilgax. Vilgax is the one constant villain across nearly the entire franchise, chasing the Omnitrix through 5 different series and multiple movies, and yet the story built around him is oddly allergic to giving him a real ending. It isn't for lack of trying. The show keeps staging what look like finishing blows. At the end of Alien Force, his ship explodes and he's left sinking underwater, his fate deliberately framed as unknown. He comes back. In Ultimate Alien, he's reduced to serving as a lieutenant to the demon Dagon, gets betrayed and empowered by that same demon's stolen essence, and is finally struck down by Ben with the sword Ascalon. He comes back again. In Omniverse, he's turned to living stone as a fused, corrupted Malgax after absorbing power from a warp core meltdown, apparently killed once and for all, with only a brief, unsettling shot suggesting something might still be oozing out of the rock. Even that isn't treated as final. The last time Vilgax appears in the franchise's overall story, in the series finale, and then there was Ben, he's allied with Eon, hunting down every version of Ben across the multiverse, and gets defeated in a coordinated attack by 4 different Bens and Gwen 10 working together. He's knocked unconscious, the good Bens go their separate ways. Vilgax is simply left there, beaten, with no follow-up scene showing him captured, imprisoned, or otherwise dealt with. According to background material from the franchise's own promotional marathons, Vilgax isn't supposed to meet his true final demise until roughly 2 centuries after the original series, which all but confirms that whatever victory the finale shows us is temporary, and that somewhere out there, off-screen, in a story the franchise never got around to telling, Vilgax survives again. For a villain the franchise built its entire mythology around, the reason Ben found the Omnitrix in the first place, since Vilgax was the one chasing it to Earth. Ben 10 never actually closes the book on him. Every other major recurring villain in the series eventually gets some form of a final scene, whether it's redemption, imprisonment, or a clearly stated death. Vilgax gets a body count of near endings instead, each one undone by the next season, until the show simply runs out of episodes before it runs out of ways for him to come back. He just gets knocked out one more time than everyone else, and the credits roll. Dagon. Everything about Dagon is designed to feel unknowable, and that's not an accident, it's the point. He's introduced as an ancient demon worshipped by two secret cults, the Flamekeeper's Circle and the Esoterica, who believe he visited Earth centuries ago in the form of a massive black dragon before Sir George, the original Forever Knight, cut out his heart with the sword Ascalon and banished him back to his home dimension. The cults call him the Knowledge Bringer, and they believe he'll one day return bearing advanced alien technology to usher in a golden age free of war and disease. By the time Ben meets him, Dagon has conquered 100 dimensions. He's strong enough to strip immortality from a knight who's lived nearly 1,000 years off borrowed power. He's strong enough that when Vilgax later merges with his stolen essence, Vilgax becomes one of the single most dangerous threats Ben has ever faced, able to tear the face off Mount Rushmore and throw it like a discus. But ask what Dagon actually is, and the show has almost nothing to give you. He's not classified as a conventional alien species. The Omnitrix itself, a device built to scan and store the DNA of nearly any life form it encounters, cannot contain him, not because he's too strong, but because he doesn't register as something the Omnitrix understands at all. He's described as being beyond the scope of a DNA-based device entirely, as unknowable as magic itself. Dagon is the only member of his species ever shown on screen in any form. No others, no females, no offspring, no homeworld ever visited, no origin story for how a being like this came to exist in the first place, or whether Dagon is even a proper name or just a title borrowed from human mythology by cultists who never understood what they were actually worshipping. Every other cosmic threat in this franchise eventually gets some kind of backstory. Vilgax has a homeworld and a species, even if his final chapter never actually gets written. The Hybrid have an entire supremacist ideology laid out across multiple episodes. Even Alien X, a being capable of unmaking and remaking reality on a whim, at least has an explained species behind him, the Celestial Sapiens, with an origin point at the Forge of Creation. Dagon gets none of that. He's a demon, a god, an ancient conqueror, worshipped by cults who may have gotten the whole story wrong. And ultimately just a name, a shape, and a title, deliberately kept outside the boundaries of everything else the franchise is willing to explain. That refusal to define him is exactly what makes him land differently from every villain before him. Which one of these gaps do you think the show should have actually answered? Drop it in the comments.